Hello, everybody. This is Lindsay Clandfield. And first of all, I'm really happy to be here with you, albeit virtually and albeit in a recording, but I'm going to be there with you right after this for any questions. My talk today is on the topic of micropauses. So this is going to be very much related to online teaching. In fact, it's about micropauses as in short breaks in our online teaching, in theory and in practice. This is an area that I've been exploring because I imagine, like you, um, I've been teaching online now, well, only online for the past almost 2 years. I'd been teaching online before that, but obviously since the pandemic, a lot of us have been teaching online in rooms like this, in Zoom rooms, in Microsoft Teams, maybe Google Meet, places like that. And many of us have been doing all our teaching there. So we may have been doing sort of 3, 4, 5 or more hours a day online and teaching students live in this way. And one of the things that has come up in that has been, for the first thing, I've been getting really exhausted after long days of teaching. And I've spoken to other teachers who are getting this as well. Not to mention students. I have two sons, both of whom are studying. One of them is at university, the other is in high school. And both of them also would say the same thing, that after a full day on Zoom or on another video platform, they were exhausted. And this brings up the whole area of breaks and micro breaks. So what I want to discuss here is this is going to be a talk and workshop. So first of all, in the talky bit, I want to talk about education technology and methodology. This is another area that I've explored a lot in the most recent years, is how technology, in specific education technology, affects what we teach and how we teach it. From that, I'd like to move on to the theory of breaks in online work. So there's been a lot of sort of studying of breaks and micro breaks for people who do lots of work online, sort of with computers and stuff. So we're going to look a little bit about the theory behind that. Then we'll look at planning and micro pauses. So how can we plan our lessons to include these kinds of small little breaks to not lose our students, to still keep our students together, and but make it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience, to give people a little bit of a break. And I would also like to look at micro pause activities. So activities that we can do so that the pause becomes not just a pause, but another way of practicing a small bit of English. All right, so let's get started. I'm a firm believer that there are certain kinds of education technologies that favor a certain teaching style. And if we take the word education technology at its broadest sense, we could argue that something even as simple as a blackboard is a form of one of the earliest kinds of education technology. Now, thinking of the blackboard, what the blackboard did was, when it became introduced as like a whole wall-sized blackboard, something that was big that everybody could see, it lent itself well to a certain kind of teaching. That kind of teaching would be of a presentation mode. So once a teacher had a blackboard, the easiest thing to do was go into presentation mode. The teacher would stand at the front of the classroom. Everyone else is sitting down in rows, perhaps, so everybody could see the blackboard, and they teach from there. This also lent itself well to what would be called lockstep activities, where the teacher and the students are all moving together through activities. Yeah, so the blackboard favors that kind of teaching. Because it's a single big space where everybody is working at the same time, it favors that kind of lockstep teaching. A blackboard also favors, especially if the teacher was writing questions and answers on it, a sort of one right answer approach. So the teacher would turn to the blackboard. What's the answer to this here? Yes. Oh, good. Manuel, what do you think? Okay, Jose, what do you say? Maria, etc. Yeah. And finally, obviously, a blackboard leads itself to kind of teacher-led teaching. Yes. So think about times where you've taught in a classroom where there's been no blackboard or whiteboard, and everyone is maybe sitting around small tables. It changes the dynamic, and it favors another kind of teaching style. The blackboard was one of the earliest ones, but the same thing happened again when we moved to well, there was a big period in the late 90s, early 2000s where interactive whiteboards were going to be the big thing. And when the interactive whiteboard came out, everyone, the people selling them, believed that it would revolutionize teaching. They said it could be far more democratic. The students would want to come up and teach, and share ideas and be able to write on it, and you could project things. But in the end, despite the advertising, a lot of teaching with interactive whiteboards became even more teacher-led, teacher-focused, because the teacher had all the things in their computer. The teacher it favored a way that you could present information perhaps more colorfully, with sound, with images, video, etc. And what ended up happening was the teacher would present even more than before. Some teachers, of course, did allow students much more autonomy to come up to it, but even then it would still be lockstep, everyone doing things at the same time. And now if we fast forward another 20 years to a widespread use of video conference technology, for example, Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet, those are the three biggest video conferencing platforms that were used during the pandemic. I think we're seeing a similar thing happen, is that these platforms, this technology for video conferencing, was originally meant for meetings. It was originally built for sort of business meetings where one person normally was talking at a time. So people would take turns, and where maybe somebody was presenting information and other people were listening. So it was sort of built from the ground up for that, and then was able to be used, and in some cases very effectively, for teachers. And in many cases, it was better than nothing for teachers, especially during the pandemic. But it still lent itself to those kinds of teaching. So I believe that when teachers use tools and technology that is inherently better suited for a certain kind of delivery, it's easy to slip into only doing that kind of delivery. So for example, group work, pair work, collaboration takes a little bit more effort to implement and can easily get less focus. Now I know what you're thinking. If you taught with Zoom or Microsoft Teams, you might be thinking, yes, we had breakout rooms. And that's true. The breakout rooms got better and better throughout the last 2 years as Zoom and Teams and Google started working on those more, because so many teachers were using them. But even that being true, it is a bit more difficult to set up a breakout room, have the students go and do it. Many teachers were worried that they couldn't see what was going on at the same time in the breakout rooms. Student wouldn't join them, etc. So regardless of if it was possible, it was still more effort to implement than, for example, in a face-to-face classroom, simply saying to all the students, here, work in pairs, you in pairs, you in pairs, you in pairs. Another thing that happened with Zoom classes that I observed and has been talked about is that the idea of thinking time and silence and dead time tend to be avoided. This is something as teachers that we learn when, for example, we are teaching for the first time in front of a group. You get nervous. And so some people, when they get nervous, they tend to talk a lot more. So you see new teachers explain and then re-explain and re-explain and explain things over and over again because they're nervous in a new situation. I think the same thing was happening to many of us when we were teaching online. It was easier to just keep talking and explain things in many different ways, especially checking that everyone's there. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Etc. So what has resulted is that since the pandemic has hit and so many teachers have been using video conferencing, teachers were often spending more time than normal lecturing, explaining, or presenting material. Now, in some cases, this might be okay. But in the case of language teachers, we have spent the last 30, 40, 50 years working on methodology that allowed us to not have to explain so much and present so much and let the students do more things. And I think in a way, the technology has sort of brought us back to a much more explaining, lecturing situation. Finally, in a video conferencing situation, when we teach in this way for long periods of time, can result in what is known as Zoom fatigue. I'm sure you've heard of this before, but it's a term that was around even before people were teaching a lot online with it. People were complaining of Zoom fatigue in business meetings, for example. And this only got worse during the pandemic. Um, there was a really interesting paper that came out in 2021 that gave the actual sort of neurological reasons for scientific reasons for Zoom fatigue. So this was published. Where was it? Published in February 2021, called Nonverbal Overload, a theoretical argument for the causes of Zoom fatigue. Now, I read this paper and I was adapted some of those arguments for why I think this was happening for the teachers. So one of the first things they say is that when you see yourself online all the time, in a video call all the time, it does become fatiguing. And so it's imagine like you are watching yourself teach, because when you are in an online lesson, you can often see yourself in a little camera on the side. So in a way, it's like as if you were teaching in front of a mirror all the time. Doing that after a while can become quite fatiguing. Another thing that causes Zoom fatigue is that in a video conference meeting or class, your mobility as a teacher is dramatically reduced. I think of all the teaching and training I've done over the past 2 years, I've always been in this same chair. I'm lucky if I move around a little bit, but it's nothing like when I teach, when I'm walking up and down the aisles, checking students. I may be teaching from the front of the class. I may sit down for a minute or two while they do something. I may stand up and circulate. In a classroom on a video conferencing, I can't do that. My mobility is reduced, which also adds to the fatigue. According to this article, the cognitive load in video chats is higher. People work harder to send and receive nonverbal signals. So you may have seen this in meetings or in classes. If you want to show that you agree, people tend to like nod. You have to work a lot harder, which also means that if you are looking at your students and they aren't working very hard, they look even more bored than they might do in real life, because they will be like that all the time. So it's harder to send nonverbal signals. It's harder to receive them. So it gives the impression that people are more bored or zoning out. And also you can't see what's going on around. So students may be talking and then suddenly looking over there because something has happened in their house. Finally, if all the participants have their video on, having a sustained eye contact from many people can be stressful. Even more if the window size on the screen, if like the size of their video window is making their faces large, because continued eye contact with other people over a long period of time does become stressful. And in classrooms, people are often listening, they're looking up at you, they're looking down at their book, they're writing something down, they're making a note, they're looking over to the side. You may be looking there, you may be turning around to the board, but in a video class, everyone is sort of staring each at their screens, and this can cause fatigue for teachers as well. So what we're going to do first now, so I'm going to practice a little bit what I preach. We're going to do a micro break activity. Even if you're watching this on the recording, I'd like you to try this for a second. I'll turn my camera off when I do this. What I'd like you to do is look away from the screen, find something to look at that is at least 20 feet away. If you don't, you may want to look out a window. If that's possible, look out a window. You can stand up if you need to. Focus on the thing you chose in stage 2 to look at for 20 seconds. Come back and write in the chat what you looked at. Obviously, we're recording this, so I won't ask you to write in the chat, but I'd like you to do it anyway, to just get up, walk away from the computer for 20 seconds, look at something out the window. I'll do the same thing. Ready? Let's do it. Okay, I'm back again. If I was doing this with my students, I would write now in the chat, I would write a cat on a balcony. It was a black cat on a balcony that is in the apartment building in front of mine. So I was looking out the window. And I would ask students to write what they saw out the window. That's sort of just to introduce a little bit of English to it, but that's an example of a micro break. Just a 20-second break, get people to stand up, focus on something that is a little bit further away, and then say what they were looking at. Okay. Lots have been written on the benefits of short screen breaks, short breaks from the screen. Taking a short break can help improve your attention and concentration. In fact, just getting up and doing that 20-second break and coming back here, I felt a little bit reinvigorated. You know, I'm doing this as a recording, so it's slightly different, but I felt sort of ready to go back into it. A small break can also help reduce stress. And alleviate discomfort and reduce chances of injuries. This is all research done based on people working in offices in front of computers for a long time. Things like the journal Environmental Psychology, 40-second green roof views sustain attention. So trying to get people to pay attention by getting them to deliberately stop paying attention for a while and then come back, yeah? And I think this kind of thing in class happens sort of regularly when you transition from one thing to another. People may be turning the pages or working with a different pair. In an online classroom, it would involve sort of just moving away from the screen for a couple of seconds. I found this poster from the American Optometric Association, the 20-20-20 rule, which I thought was interesting. This is what they instructions that the eye doctors will give to people who have to work in front of a computer all day to prevent digital eye strain. They suggest you take a 20-second break every 20 minutes and look at something 20 feet away. So what's 20 feet, maybe 8-9 meters away. The idea is that you will, your eyes, the strain of the eyes of looking at a screen, especially if it's closer, will be reduced. So 20 seconds every 20 minutes, looking at something 20 feet away. Even if we're looking at the 20-20-20 rule for online classes, imagine you have an online class that is 60 minutes. That would mean 3 20-second breaks. So maybe sort of looking at how we could incorporate that into the class to avoid having too much strain. So when can these breaks occur? We could do a break, for example, to do a reading activity by asking the students to, when they have to do a reading, asking them to turn their cameras off and do the reading perhaps in their course book or in a worksheet. So if you are working with a course book, get them to look away from the screen. They turn away, open the book, and just read the text there and give them a little bit of time to think about the answer to a question. I think us as teachers have found that we've had to train ourselves to give students a bit more time to think about the answer to a question. And sometimes that time gets shortened in the online classroom. So training ourselves to give a bit more time, just saying, everybody take 20 seconds to think about the answer to this. During a listening lesson sequence, so if you were doing a listening, get them to listen once, then 20 seconds, let it sink in, everybody, look away from the screens. Okay, let's come back, let's listen again. To do a short writing activity, I've started doing in online classes short writing activities where I get them to write something on a piece of paper, not always typing into the chat, sometimes writing something on a piece of paper. We'll look at a short writing activity that you can do with your students at the end of our session. To brainstorm a solution to a puzzle or a suggestion, and have even an appointed break time. Have a time where it's sort of like a 2-minute break, 1-minute break, something like that, halfway through the class. This is a bit like you have in the face-to-face class. Yeah, sometimes in a face-to-face class, you say, okay, everybody, just take 30 seconds while I prepare the next activity. And then you're getting things ready on your computer, or you're writing something on the board. All those times in real class, those are times when we're often giving students breaks. And it's easy to sort of slip out of that in the online classroom. So, the next thing I wanted to mention is the use of the camera and the audio by the teacher and its role in the micro breaks. So if we go back to what I was saying before about the stress of being online, being on camera for a long period of time, one thing you can do is you can turn the camera off at times. When we did that little micro break activity, for example, I turned my camera off. just for 15 seconds. There are times now when I'm teaching where I will sometimes turn my camera off and I'll let them do things. Then when I turn the camera back on, they know we're back together as a group. So if I assign a break or work to be done away from the screen, I also turn off my camera and audio. And I use the camera coming on to indicate that an activity is recommencing. So that's sort of like the quiet times. I know what some of you are thinking. Oh, but if I turn my camera off, how do I know that they're still paying attention? How can I be sure if they can't see me? I'm not talking about a long time to turn your camera off, just a short time. And as they slowly get used to it, because you could still kind of talk unless you are actually taking the little break yourself, okay? I think that another thing that you can do is you can hide your self view. So in some video conferencing things, you can drag your little icon of yourself around. So if you are comfortable with how you look on the screen, you can sometimes drag it over to the side so you're not always looking at yourself for certain activities. That's one thing that I find is that when I'm observing teachers teaching online classes, it depends where their camera is pointing. So they often tend to be looking at themselves on the screen. So you want to try to look a bit more at the camera. Also, you could have moments in the class where it's audio only moments, where you say, okay, maybe a dictation, or maybe, okay, everyone turn off your cameras. You're just going to, and you have a big picture on the screen and you say, I'm going to describe some things in the picture, listen to the description, and you don't have your picture on. So they're just listening to you now. So this will give you a little bit of a break of always looking at yourself so that you don't have that sensation of I'm teaching in a mirror all the time. Okay, we're going to do another short micro break here. I'm going to turn off my camera and give the instructions. I'd like you to try to do this. I'll do it at the same time, but I'm doing it camera off. Okay, everybody, first stand up. Stretch your arms out. Roll your head and shoulders. Now walk to the nearest door and count the steps. I'm going to do that as well. Walk to the nearest door and count how many steps. Now come back to the screen. Get settled in. And now we turn on our cameras. I turn on my camera, turn on your cameras again, and we're back. So this is another example of a short break, but here what I've done is instead of just getting you to focus on something, I've gotten you to stretch a little bit, and I gave a little tiny task. The tiny task was to walk to the nearest door and count the steps. That's just an excuse for you to sort of get out of the chair. I've seen teachers of younger learners use this really effectively, and then they do an activity where people have to say how many steps and then make sentences for comparatives, like your door is closer than my door, or I have to walk further than you do. It's always interesting where some people say, I walked 3 steps to the door. Another person will say, I walked 20 steps. So you can say, wow, you're in a big room, etc. And coming back to the screen and sitting down, everyone should feel a little bit refreshed. Again, looking online, if you look online for desk stretches, so these are things that you can do at your desk. These are advice for people who work in computers and stuff, ideas to stretch while you're at your desk. Take a look at some of these ones. For example, a back one, neck. Obviously, we have to be careful with our students. We aren't doctors, so we're not going to ask them to do complicated things. Most of these deck stretches that you find online are perfectly doable by most people. So just even the neck left, neck right, if you've been working for a long time. So you could do a sort of simple version of some of these things. They're a little bit like the stretches that they often tell you to do on an airplane if you've been sitting in the same position for a long time on an airplane. So I like to occasionally have one little stretch activity in the class. And also it's a way of reviewing body vocabulary, roll, stretch, pull your arm over, etc. So you can do this as part of body vocabulary review and giving instructions. almost like a total physical response activity. So here are some sample little activities for micropauses that involve movement, okay? Suitable for younger or older learners. So the first one was get up and walk to the nearest door, count the steps, come back and say how many steps you had. Get up and blink your eyes 5 to 10 times rapidly. I had read that as well as another way of relieving screen fatigue is to blink several times rapidly. I find that I need to do that, especially if I find I'm taking off my glasses and rubbing my eyes because I've been in front of the screen for a long time. I'll often blink things very quickly. Get up and do a lap around your house. Maybe not running, but walk around your house. Get up and do 3 to 5 simple stretches. All of these are nice little micropause activities during an online classroom to sort of break things up. However, we can also introduce language to these kinds of things. So if we looked at this slide here, we're just movement activities. We are language teachers as well, right? So what kind of language activities could we do? All right. Another one, sample micropause activities for language. All these ones I've tried before. For example, walk around and find 3 things that are green. Then come back and tell us the green things that you found, right? So you walk around the house, or things, look for something that's green, things that in English. Walk to a bookshelf, take a book and bring it back to show us. Or take a souvenir and show us or something. Go to the fridge and get some water. Make a mental note of 5 English words for you for things that you see there, that you see in the fridge. So I did this with a class when we were doing food vocabulary. I said, everyone go get some water from the fridge or from the kitchen, but open the fridge door, take a quick look, think of 5 things, come back to the screen and type in the chat box 5 things that you saw in English in the fridge. Another one that I did was walking around, naming things you can see in English, sort of say them out to yourself. So, for example, try to name 20 things. I look around, I'm thinking a carpet, wardrobe, a desk, chair, poster, etc. So I'm looking around and stuff. Open a window or door to the outside. And we're going to do another kind of activity a bit like this at the end. Listen for 30 seconds. What do you hear? Or another one, this one takes a bit longer, is get an item of clothing or a souvenir or an object to tell us something about. Come back and I nominate 1 or 2 people. And don't say who I'm going to nominate, but I nominate 2 or 3 people to just share something. Again, these are activities which get someone away from the screen, doing something else, but also language related. So what I want you to do now is we're going to do another sort of 1-minute break. This will be a 1-minute break. And I'll follow this up with you at the end of the session when you see me live. I want you to think of another mini activity you could do like this, okay? So a mini activity that you could do like this based on any of my ideas that you could do with your students, okay? I'll turn my camera off for 40 seconds to 1 minute, all right? Maybe get up and kind of look around and think, what could you do as a simple micropause activity that includes some language? And we're back. So maybe at the end of the session, if people have questions about the things, people can also suggest any other micropause activities that they could think of. Even something as simple as walk around and find 3 things that are red. That's cheating a bit, but it's another idea. Right. Let's keep going here. Another one, slightly longer activity would be to sort of get people to make sentences or do language activities which involve them moving away and doing something a bit longer. Here's a simple activity I've done with A1 students. So I post a preposition. So I put it on the shared screen, like on my PowerPoint. Preposition is like in or on or at. So students get up and find an object from their home to illustrate the prepositions. For example, the flowers are in the vase. The cat is on my lap. When they come back, call on students to share their sentences. If it's possible, they turn on their webcam to show it. Yeah. Next micropause, nominate a student to give the next preposition and repeat the activity. So another one they could do this with is prepositions of movement, across, over. Students report an action they did during the micropause. I walked across the room. I jumped over the dog. Well, maybe not jumping over the dog, but you get the idea. So essentially for each micropause, you give a preposition and they have to go do something like a movement thing or a placement thing for that preposition. So this is sort of expanding it even a little bit further. Another one, and I'd like to almost finish by asking you to do this one here, is a little bit more of a detailed one. So I'm going to give, again, a couple of minutes for you to actually do this one. This is a sensory poem, and this was my colleague Jill Hadfield, who wrote a series of activities on this with me. She's done this before with her students. So I'm not going to make you do this for 5 or 10 minutes, but with students, they could go 5 minutes to sit in silence outside, either at their balcony or to look out the window, or if they have a garden, go in the garden or a patio. And they have to think about these questions. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you feel? Okay, so they go out and they do that. When they come back, they discuss the different things that they experienced. Okay, and then so I would say, Guadalupe, what did you see? Fred, what did you hear? John, what did you smell, etc. But they have to make notes, and then on the shared screen we give the framework to a poem. For example, spring, the title would be either spring or summer or autumn or winter, and then morning, afternoon. So it could be, in my case, I'm in Spain right now, this would be winter afternoon. Okay, it could be spring morning, summer evening, I suppose could be another possibility. And then they make a line. The first line is to do with the hearing. It's something noun-ing. So in my case, I'm going to do it in a second here. And then the sight would be noun-ing, and then the smell, scent of noun, and touch, noun, preposition, noun. Okay. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to look out a window and think of what you can see, hear, smell, feel, how you would do this, okay? Let's do that. Ready? 30 seconds, and I'll turn my camera off and then back on again. Okay, so for example, my poem might go something like winter afternoon in Spain. Here I would say motorcycles revving, the sound of a vroom, vroom, because that was outside the window. Sun shining, the scent of, oh, I didn't have a smell actually. The scent of motorcycle oil. Hands touching the rail, or hands on the rail. Let me show you some examples that students came up with. These were higher level students. Summer afternoon, birds chirping. These were Jill's students in New Zealand. Butterflies fluttering, the scent of flowers, the sun on my face. Autumn morning, wind blowing, leaves falling, the scent of bonfire smoke, a chill in the air. So we could even share examples like this, but then they make their own poems. So here is a writing activity which incorporates an element of a break in it, so a break away from the screen. And these kinds of activities I've often called zooming out activities, where in fact the activity involves you getting away from the screen to do something and then coming back and reporting on it. And one thing I've noticed is doing these with students is there's often a sort of a bit more of an energy buzz when they've come back. I know some of you may be thinking, oh, but if I get them to go out, maybe they won't come back. It's a bit dangerous with the teenagers and so on and so forth. I would say use which ones of these activities you think are best for different groups of students, of course. So in terms of micropauses and planning, let's talk a little bit about that. One thing you may have noticed, I noticed since teaching more on Zoom, is that covering the same amount of material online is more challenging than face-to-face. So I think I can get through more in a face-to-face class hour than an online hour. It takes me a little bit longer. And I think that micro breaks, you could argue, I already can't cover all the material. It takes up even more valuable time. So when planning a lesson, it may be that assigning some of the work before the lesson can help reduce this. So using the famous flipped teaching methodology, they try to do the reading before or try to do some of the grammar activities. And then micropauses could become part of a natural part of the lesson, reading something, preparing something quietly. Remember that in the research on micropauses, in fact, a pause can sometimes focus attention even more rather than allowing you to lose attention. So doing a micropause a bit earlier in the class can mean that it's less likely you will skip it. So if you try to say, I'll do that towards the end, you might find that you're getting caught up with too many other things. So I try to schedule one slightly earlier in a session or in a class. Another piece of advice would be look at some of the activities for the class and think how part of them can be done off screen. Can they read the thing in their book off screen? Can they go and write something off screen? Can they make a sign to show and do that off screen? The more you get practice in micropauses, the more that it becomes quicker and easier for us to do. That brings me almost to an end here. What I wanted to do is just as part of my review here, just go over what we've looked at. We started our session today by looking at education technology and methodology and how I believe that certain technologies lend themselves to certain kinds of methodology. Specifically, in the case of video conferencing, which a lot of us are using for live online teaching, it lends itself to lecturing, like what I'm doing now. It lends itself to teacher-led activities. It lends itself to lockstep work, with breakout rooms being a way of getting around that. We looked at how breaks in online work can be quite advantageous. The reasons for Zoom fatigue, why teaching on Zoom can make you feel tired. It's like kind of teaching in front of the mirror all the time, or having everybody looking at you and making that eye contact, or not being able to move around as much as you do when you are teaching like in a classroom. And how research into breaks in online work showed that breaks did allow for people to even focus their attention more, to concentrate better. We looked at planning, how you could incorporate perhaps some micropauses into your planning at the beginning, perhaps better of a class, thinking of activities that could be done with like getting away from the screen a little bit, ways that you could make a 20-second micropause part of your lesson and give it as an excuse to practice something in English. And finally, we looked at a variety of micropause activities. This just about brings me to the end of my session. Before I just give you a bit more information about me, I want to say thank you very much for coming, for listening to this session. I hope some of these ideas may prove useful to you, or the theory behind them at least may prove useful to you as we go forward, if we're still doing online lessons, thinking how we could include more breaks. Just a little bit more about me. So first of all, thank you very much. I'm a writer of material. I'm a podcaster as well. So you can, if you like some of my ideas, you can listen to the TEFL Commute podcast where you get podcasts. I often do work on books, apps, talks, and so on. You can find out about me at my website, lindsayclandfield.com. And I look forward to taking your questions after this. Thank you very much.